If flex schedule is a possibility for any of your employees, I would highly encourage you to have them work that schedule.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for all stakeholders. Today, I'm talking about hiring neurodiverse employees with Christy Close. Christy owns and operates HR Solid Foundation, a business and consulting firm. Christy also facilitates human resources classes at the college level and leads HR certification prep classes. And get this, has a 97% pass rate for first time test takers. She is the author of Employee Relations 101 and the book she's co authored about hiring neurodivergent employees will be released in the spring of 2026. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Christy.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
So, how did you become so interested in hiring neurodiverse people that you wrote a whole book on it?
Well, to be honest, it all started when last May I was actually talking to one of the high school counselors, and my daughter, she's a ADHD poster child. So when she was starting school back up, and so just last year, it was just amazing. I sat there with the counselor as we're going over to make sure all the teachers that will have my daughter in their class will have a note saying she needs written instructions if you're going to give a laundry list of things to do. And my daughter was very matter of factly the way she was asking. It wasn't more of a, hey, can we do this? It was like, when are you going to have this ready? And are the teachers going to have it? And I was like,
Mhm.
wow. And so as the counselor pulled out this 3-ring notebook that we looked like we had in the 80s, just a really big one on your shelf, it turned out that those were the people who had a 504, some type of accommodation is what they were calling
Mhm.
it. And so when she brought that out, I was like, oh my, that's huge. And she told me that she goes, well, what we have more and more every year that need to have this type of instruction. I'm like, okay. So we completed our meeting and I asked her, I said, by the way, if you don't mind me asking, how many people were on a 504 that just graduated? And so it didn't take her but seconds. And she's like, well, we had about 1,000 people who graduated, and I believe I had 410 that
Wow.
had an accommodation. And I was like, what? How? Because I'm thinking if my daughter would have walked into a place of employment and said, by the way, I need those instructions, I need them written out by this time, we would have looked at her like she was crazy.
Mhm.
And so it really got me into the thinking, is the workforce ready for this? Or better yet, whether they're ready or not, it's coming. So that kind of started out my trying to get the workplace ready, or better yet, so that my daughter wouldn't be fired right away from her first job,
All right.
is
Well,
really the train of thought I was thinking. But we have a lot of people who do a lot of what I've now referred to, and it's been through all these articles and during research, as masking, trying to
mhm.
fit in, not trying to act like it takes them a few more seconds to think about a process or an explanation.
Yeah, and I think, and I wonder if that's 40% of that one graduating class. That's a lot. And I wonder if how many, is this something that's increasing or are we just becoming more aware of it? And the expectation is in the schools and in the workplaces, leaders are supposed to be there to make those participants successful, to give them the opportunities for success at least. And sometimes that means we change how we give them instructions in the classroom, how they take tests, or in the real world, in the working world, how we set out job expectations, how they get performance feedback, and things like that, and maybe even, and we'll talk about this, how we attract them to the organization and what that process is for them to even raise their hand and express interest in something. But and certainly, I think that's probably always been there, and I wonder again how many people just got written off for bad behavior or being quirky. Um, I wasn't, and it wasn't until I was in my. I mean, I think we always knew it, but I wasn't into my probably my early 40s before I was, a doctor finally said, "You realize you're pretty ADHD." And I'm like, "Yeah, I could probably, there's a reason I work for myself and not for other people." But it wasn't a surprise, but I had found ways and taught myself some behavior modifications and learned how to embrace some of the aspects of it and I was fortunate enough to find jobs early in my career and then set out on my own entrepreneurship program that helped me be successful with those skill sets. But if you had, and my employees, I tell them up front, I need an email with 4 bullet points. Don't give me a ton of stuff to read because I'm just going to glaze over. And I also know that they are different than me and need a lot more detail. And so I go through the very painful process sometimes for me of really spelling out all the details and being explicitly clear about stuff. So I think we're all, I mean, when we're saying neurodivergent, what we're really talking about is a kind of a bell curve. And where when we're saying neurotypical, that's just the people that meet in this narrow area. And I think we've all got different, none of us are, we're just not robots. And so we're all wired a little different. Um, so when you're talking about neurodiversity, then what exactly are you speaking about versus, just some of the standard labels we give people?
Right. Well, when we talk about neurodivergence, I always think of somebody, it's like they think differently than I do. And I'm finding that it's such a strength in that when we talk about neurodivergence, literally, it's not about, uh, you know, we see diversity. We always used diversity and DEI
Hmm.
and making sure that we are including everyone that's different, quote unquote. And so when I think of neurodivergence, I'm thinking of people who are thinking differently than I. Um, and what's said here is in my household, I'm very typical. Mom, you're typical,
Hmm.
So I'm like, well, okay.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to adjust my train of thought. It's just I think that to be honest, that we've all worked with people we thought, and as you said, quirky. I've always heard like, they're a little different or something like that. But at the end of the day, when we talk about neurodivergence, we are talking about people who may have had some type of diagnosis or something saying they're ADHD or they are, I think maybe they're on the spectrum. That's my
Hmm.
currently favorite saying that I've heard. Maybe they're just on the spectrum. And so someone who that or autistic, and it's really interesting the way this has all come about as to speaking about neurodivergence and what that actually brings to the table. I'm like, I want to take total advantage of every non, typical thinker out there because how nice is it to go to the drawing board and have such a variety of ideas and better yet, so out of the box type of thinking. And so I'm really hoping we can embrace that people do not feel like they need to stand behind and mask it any longer, that they are feel free to explore everything that their brain brings to the table. So,
Yeah. Talk about that. What in those different ways of thinking or responding to problems or even responding to stimuli, talk about how those different perceptions, those different ways of processing information and then, outputting their responses can change an organization and can benefit an
oh my
organization.
goodness, the list is long, which I'm grateful for. But the bringing somebody in who does speak like that, and we talked about changing the way that we do our recruiting and how we look for people and things of that nature. But as far as what it can do for an organization, having somebody who is an out of the box thinker and having somebody who can't even see the box, it's so far
Mhm.
out. But the analytical side, we found to be very fascinating. In fact, running circles around my ideas, to be honest, as I had one person say, it's like, not that you're bad. I love that. I was like, oh, I'm bad now. Well,
Yeah.
not
As
that
soon as
you're,
I hear it, it's
not
not
that,
that you, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I
not that
know.
you're
Here it
bad.
comes.
But told me that, you're like a Chevrolet Impala going down the road, and some of these people around you are like Ferraris. They're running circles. You're still going through one idea and exploring how that can do certain things, and they've got 3 different ones coming at you.
Mhm.
So, found it analytical, definitely patterns, things like that. We've noticed during this research that we have a lot of people who are able to they go into coding because they notice a
Mhm.
pattern right away. Um, and the creativity. Um, we actually did an experiment with a few folks we had taken who had definitely fit into this, into whether it's on the spectrum or ADHD, and myself, and we all painted this one little scene, and they just described it to us. And mine looked like what I thought it was exactly what was explained. We were draw this truck with a tree. I mean, we were doing this kind of stuff. And mine looked like nobody else's.
Mhm.
I was like, oh, oh my, and I'm like, what a great exercise just to see what they can, it's so weird. I think we live with it every day, and yet it seems like it's the first time we've heard about it.
Mhm.
And, it's coming to light.
Yeah,
So,
we're finding the different labels for it or ways of recognizing it as maybe atypical, according to the wherever that mean is on that bell curve,
right,
but also at the same time, just a very we've all been exposed to it. So if we really think about it, uh, it's not these folks aren't that different than the vast population. So and some, like you said, some are very analytical, others are very creative, and this whole spectrum is part of what probably makes it hard for businesses to figure out how to plug these people in because it's not one size fits all.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is leads to our different ways to interview.
Hmm.
Well, to start a little farther back than that and recruit.
Right.
Where are we going to recruit? What are we doing? Uh, it was really interesting. I had this gentleman that I have worked with for seems like most of my life. And I had called him up and I was like, hey, how's it going? And he said, oh, I've got a bunch of interviews today. And I was like, oh, he said, yeah, I'm looking for an accountant. And I'm like, okay. I said, well, what if I told you that I have an accountant who will come with, great background and references and just got laid off, really looking for a job. And he was like, oh my gosh, that'd be great. I'm like, okay, now just to let you know, I mean, he's a little different.
Mhm.
He, instead of having the strong handshake, he doesn't want a handshake. He's not used to, he doesn't want to do that. He really needs a room where it's quiet so he can do his work and no bright lights. And he really doesn't make good eye contact, but his work is impeccable. And the gentleman goes, well, I don't know if that's going to work. And I was like, flabbergasted. I mean, you could have knocked me out of my chair. I was like, "What?" I was like, "What do you mean you don't know?" And he was like, "Well, I mean, I need somebody who I can talk with and I can." I was like, "Well, you talk numbers, he'll talk numbers." And he was like, "Well, we have those occasional board meetings and you might have to speak. And so if that's odd." And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, "What in the world is going on? Why would you're going to lose out on someone who comes with great references, great skill sets, and yet your biggest concern is that, well, he won't shake my hand. I don't know if I trust that. And you don't know how well he's going to do talking in a boardroom that happens once in a blue moon."
Right. And we start to narrow in on those contingencies, those weird situations
Absolutely.
outside of the routine and say, how are they going to perform in this environment? And I think part of, as soon as people see that first little red flag that this person's behavior is a little different, they go, we identify immediately where would that be uncomfortable? And so rather than saying, hey, what I need is an accountant who can grind out these numbers, who can make sure we're balanced, that our accounts payables are done, that our taxes get done and our filings are all right. We think to that, okay, once a quarter, I've got a board meeting and this person's got to present the financials. Okay, if the financials are right and they're balanced, the board is going to overlook a little quirkiness or a little
Absolutely.
atypical behavior. but we
True
get
story all day.
backed up with that, right? And I think it's the same thing we had 50 years ago, 60 years ago, as women entered the workforce. What's it going to be like if I have a female manager over these men who've been in the, or, how are people going to respond? Or, you and I are both here in Texas, and I've talked over the years to clients who say, whoever's going to be on that front desk answering the phones, they can't have an accent. I don't mind hiring people from, from Mexico or Central or South America, but I need my clients to hear an American voice when they, and what they're overthinking it, because
Right.
our clients don't care. What they want is somebody who's friendly, welcoming, they can understand, but welcoming, friendly, and makes them feel like their call matters. That's what they want to hear. But we worry about that small percentage of people who may be really, might not like that. And we miss the opportunity to hire people who would be excellent contributors to the organization.
And here we are, we have people who are, they're unemployed. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as most people have started to get on the bandwagon with AI, and I actually ask AI. In fact, I wrote it down so I make sure to tell you verbatim because I don't want to misquote AI.
Yeah.
But the AI basically stated, because my question was, in regards to, in the U.S., how many people who are labeled neurodivergent are unemployed? That is what I
Hmm.
actually ask. Currently, the statistics do not have a real number, but it shows 30 to 40% of those who fall into neurodivergent, ADHD, autistic, on the spectrum, dyslexia, are 30 to 40% unemployed. As of this point in time, the real factors that come in that are causing for concern is in regards to 85% are notated in the autism space that have college degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just, I mean, that is incredible to me that we would have such in just, I don't know. I'm still a little floored by it, to be honest. And
Well, and I
to,
think I've shared here that I've got a close friend who's one of the brightest guys I know, 3 college degrees, 2 master's degrees, and an undergrad, reads multiple languages, and I think speaks 3 or 4 at least. And brilliant guy, and is clearly, if you spend 20 minutes with him, oh, he's on, he didn't always pick up the social clues,
right?
and but a curious, thoughtful person who, any organization, if they could find the job that he wanted to do and was well fitted for him, would really benefit from. But I think we get, worried about people on the spectrum or anything else. But so let's get into the recruiting process. Let's say I'm an employer and I want to be more open to, I want to invite the talent in, because let's face it, quality talent isn't easy to find. In the recruiting process, from the job posting through the application process, what challenges do our normal processes present for some people with neurodiverse traits?
Okay. So in the recruiting side, I would say that our biggest changes be in the job description. Some of them are very vague, or they use just certain verbiage that just applies maybe to a specific part, such as, and I'll take HR as a great example, is that we might put in there something in regards to, instead of saying compliance or reporting, we just put EEO1, EEO2. And so using verbiage that way, and normally we started out using that. So like, if they know what these words mean, then we're
They're,
good to go,
they're
kind
competent.
of
Yeah.
thing. It's kind of like when people ask me, do you have an HR certification? And I could say anything under the moon.
Hmm.
They don't ask for anything specific. They're like, well, as long as you have a certification, that's what's important. So it has nothing to do with that skill set. But the job description, definitely, I think our verbiage is, we need to list it out as to what we want, instead of saying takes care of all facets of da 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 da.
Hmm.
Um, I think we miss out on a lot of that. As to where we actually put it out, our information, and some of us just go to, like, we need a college graduate, so we're looking at the surrounding colleges, those graduates. When the truth of the matter is that we might have someone who maybe has their, talking about multiple masters programs or something of that nature, but it wasn't to one of those colleges.
Mhm.
And so we have a lot of people, and especially in my area in North Texas, we've noticed that there is a serious shift as to people coming into our area. They're looking for jobs as they know that they're moving with a spouse to the area, and we don't have anything listed. We are no longer using some of the, you know, websites that are, career focused. And so I think that where we actually advertise, other than just putting it on, companies' websites,
Mhm.
would be a great start. There's also as to the way we do our interviews, that some interviewers don't like it when it takes people more than a few seconds to respond.
Mhm.
I think people lose out. I have interviewers that are like, "Oh, they took too long to think about that. They don't know. They were trying to craft something up in their mind." You get those kind of responses. And so, some people have played with, well, why don't we send out kind of like a little 411 before you come in? Here's what you need to know. And that we'll be asking questions in regards to specific processes of this job. So putting something like that. Now, to those of you that are my age and our
Mhm.
age and older,
Right.
we think that might sound a little crazy. A little, it's like, are you serious? Why don't we just go ahead and hand feed them while we're at it? It's kind of the response that I've been given on a few occasions, and so I'm like, is there? Can you imagine if you were working in the corporate world and you knew that every Tuesday morning you were going to have a meeting at 10 o'clock and it was going to be in regards to a particular subject matter? Versus finding out at Tuesday morning at 9:30, "Hey, by the way, but when you have a second, I need you to, get to a good stopping point, and then we're gonna meet about whatever." And then you go in and you're kind of, you're, "Okay, what are we here for? What's going on?" "Oh, we're talking about the finances." "Oh, okay. Do I need to bring any information? Do I?" And then you catch people off guard. And I think that's what I really like that this book is really unfolding, that we were finding was like, this isn't accommodating the few. This is going to be helping the masses. I mean, like, I don't care if you're what people call normal or typical or atypical, or finding out, that you are neurodivergent. Who wouldn't like a schedule where you know what's going to happen, where you
Right.
know how things are going to unfold? So
Yeah,
we start
yeah.
out the process when we're recruiting and we list all those things. We have that laid out. I mean, we're just working on employee engagement right from the get go. And so that people can come in, they do know what is, their realistic job preview takes on a whole new meaning. So having tests, not just question and answers, because if question and answers worked, we wouldn't have turnover like we have.
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and I think I see I still see hiring managers who think the interview is about playing gotcha. Maybe it's a desire to assert who's in charge here, or they don't think quite on their feet. Well, do they need to in this job? I mean, in those kind of things.
Absolutely.
And we have these biases, or maybe we remember that one superstar employee we had who we really liked, and they had these behaviors. And maybe these are the behaviors that were most evident about them, but they're not the behaviors that made them really successful in the role. But we remember those things. And so when somebody comes and presents differently, where we think, that's not what I want. That's a different, they're weird for what this position requires. But I mean, I have an employee with dyslexia who's been with me for 13 years, and he manages himself really well, but he uses tools to make sure that what's written makes sense, and that the letters are all in the right order and things like that. And I know if we're going to throw stuff at him that he's going to have to read and consume, it's going to take him more time. I'm not going to just lay that in front of him and say, "Hey, read this and tell me what's going on here." I'm going to let him
Right.
digest it. I'm very intuitive. I jump to conclusions, and often they're right. But my wife will tell you that often I jump to conclusions that are wrong. But I'm surrounded by people who process slower. So if and I'm not going to say that all my employees are neurodivergent, but we're all different.
Right.
And so, like you say, if we have an environment that can accommodate those folks who are a little bit more atypical, then it's an environment that'll accommodate everybody and help everybody be successful. And I think that's kind of the workforce we all want to build for our companies, right?
Yes, I'm finding. I think some people that I speak with this, I was hoping it would be, that people would be like, "Oh my goodness, that sounds great. We could do this and do that." Yet I've been met with some resistance as well, though, and the resistance would be someone. In fact, this one particular HR manager, I was speaking um, at a monthly conference, and I was just opening up the field, seeing how people what their thoughts were on it as to having to okay, instead of talking someone through it, that they would need a written instruction. And this woman, she was not. She was like, "Hold the phone. So let me get this straight. What you're saying is that this is going to be like raising my children all over." And I took a second just to because I didn't want to come off as mercy, mod woman.
Yeah.
I wanted to, you're thinking it through because sometimes you get hit with questions. You're like, I never thought that I would be getting a pushback. I thought this would be
Mhm.
something like, "Oh, well, let's think about literally let's take the time to process what's being said." And so I waited a moment and I said, "I don't know how you're raising your children, but let me tell you, if you could tell me that I could write something out and my child would follow it from here until eternity, I would be all over that plan."
Right.
Just literally, I'd be all over that plan. But I'm thinking, how many times do you tell somebody and then they come back, or you tell them how you want an email, even, and they send it to you, and you're like, okay, well, you left out this, this, this. And so then you're doing it again. It's like
Mhm.
relearning, right? We're going things over. So if I just need to come up with a book of instruction one time, and then that would be follow from here until the end of time. It's like, well, let's get typing, right? Let's get on it. So um, just the thought of work schedules. Is there flexibility if they're not customer or forward facing about the times that they work? Now, personally, in my household, I am the only one that is not ADHD, and so it's a different way of living. You know what? And I never even thought about it until this all came to light. It's funny how it's all like when you see it, you see it. One of those things.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, I am a morning person. I want to get started at 7:30. I want to tackle the big things before anything else happens in the day that could throw me off course. And yet my husband and my daughter are not that. They are mid-afternoon, the juices get flowing. That's when they're the best. That's when they're the most productive by far. There to the late evening. And I'm thinking, how many people do we have that we put here's our project, your schedule's 8 to 5. We send them out the door at 5 o'clock. Well, what happens if that's those people? While so let me get this straight. We're pushing them out the door at 5 o'clock. And yet this is the best time. This is the best that they produce. This is the most creative times they have. And we don't have them at work. How nice
Yeah.
would that be? Like, if you could do a flex schedule, and every client I run into, I tell them that all the time. If flex schedule is a possibility for any of your employees, I would highly encourage you to have them work that schedule.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. If you actually listen to my little commercials here on the podcast, you know that most background screening companies only report criminal convictions in the past 7 years, and that they do that to make compliance easy. If they just restrict the information they give to all of their clients, regardless of where they're located, to 7 years, they're pretty much going to stay compliant with California and a couple other states' laws. But what difference does that 7-year limitation make? Are their clients really missing anything relevant? Well, to answer that, I just pulled a report of all the criminal convictions we reported to our clients around the country in October. 55% of the records we reported to clients were older than 7 years. That means that if our clients were only getting 7 years of records, they would have missed over half of them. But were those cases really relevant? Well, that's really for the client to decide. Some states, like California, do prohibit employers from considering criminal convictions in the past 7 years. But most states don't. And I'd argue that if an employer in a state without a 7-year limit asked about any criminal history and the applicant failed to disclose something older than 7 years, the employer just caught that person in a lie, and that should be factored into the hiring decision. Next week, I'll dive into some of the older cases we found, including, get this, a theft of a human corpse, to discuss whether the related behaviors might have been relevant to the job. But in the meantime, if it makes you nervous that you may be missing over half of the legally reportable records out there, we'd love to talk to you. You can reach out to us at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 3/4 of a recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 227 and enter the keyword divergent. That's DIVERGENT. Also, quick reminder that we're publishing a one-page discussion starter for each new episode. Some HR departments listen to the podcast and then discuss it as a group, kind of like a Good Morning HR book club, but with a podcast. Anyway, if you use that one-page discussion starter, shoot me an email and let me know how I can make it more useful for you. And now back to my conversation with Christy Close. Right. And have systems in place to measure performance. You don't have, there are still companies that manage by walking around and making sure everybody looks busy. And there are a lot of reasons not to do that. But this is one of them, right? That
Absolutely.
I need to build an environment where I'm hiring people I trust to get the job done. And then I'm able to set clear expectations and make sure they're met. But I don't want to sit and babysit. And who of us is hiring people that we want to have to manage, right? And have to sit and watch over. So if you've hired well and the job can get done. Now, again, there's times where we need people together for collaboration. There's time, and certainly their roles, and most of my team's roles. I mean, they have to work in synchronicity with each other to get information put together and out to a client, and they have to be able to respond to client calls during business hours. But I have had employees say, I can't focus enough because of all the bombardment during the day, and I've got this one project I need to get done. Do you mind if I, go on do not disturb for 4 hours or work on Saturday instead or whatever? And yeah, just get it done, because that's the big thing. And sometimes our different, personalities bump against each other. I am a quick, high level, to spit out a few details and here, run with it. And my team has taught me over the years not to be that way. But I caught myself a couple days ago on a project that had been out for about a month, where I asked somebody to do something, just sent a quick email. It seemed so obvious to me. And what they came back with was not all the, everything that I was looking for, but I hadn't asked for it because I didn't give them the level of detail. And probably if I'd given myself those same scant directions, I would have produced something different than what I'm looking for. So, sometimes we have to change our behaviors as leaders and working with our employees, and certainly finding ways to help those folks be successful. And that's what reasonable accommodations are really about, right? Finding a way to help somebody be successful. What kind of, once somebody's employed, and they ask for reasonable accommodations, we've got a clear process for following those. And we ask questions like, can you do this job with or without reasonable accommodations? But sometimes when somebody needs a reasonable accommodation to an interview process, we as employers aren't going to ask them, because that would be, that's an ADA issue. Do you need a reasonable accommodation here? But if that, it's really kind of on that candidate to raise their hand and say, hey, I have, this is something that would help me, make sure you get the best input from me during the interview. But I think applicants are nervous to do that. How would you advise a candidate to approach HR or that hiring manager if they need some sort of accommodation to really perform their best?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually have. I know we're like, what should we do? Well, I'm here to tell you that a lot of them are speaking up for themselves right from the get go, and we've put this. It's in the school level. The last few years, it has been you have to be proactive. And so I use my daughter a lot throughout the book in regards to things she's done and how it's completely changed the way I see employees. And one in particular was um, she speaks up for herself. But we've coached her along the way that hey, if you need something or if you didn't get the instruction, it's your responsibility to say, can you repeat that or can I write it down or whatever the case may be. So on the application, most people, they have something that states, if you need any assistance or an accommodation during the interview process, to please let us know. And then we'll give them a few different ways to reach out depending on so we cover what most of the accommodations might be. So when someone comes in, and I had someone just the other day, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to mention this to Mike. And it was in regards to a student that I had back in like 2012 or something. And she said, you're not going to believe this. And I'm like, what is it? And she said, I had an applicant come in today and say, if I am feeling overwhelmed, who do I need to tell or what can I do or where do I go? And I
Wow.
was like, "Oh my goodness, you know what? I think it is coming where people do know they have to speak up for themselves." And so my daughter, what we have told her is she has a processing delay, although you would never know it by some of her little quick clips that she has. But she has learned to say, "That's a good question. Can you give me a minute to think about it?"
Mhm.
And people will give her all the time in the world. They're like, "Oh, okay," and they sit back and they just wait. You know, um, And we had to do that because she kept getting in trouble at school because they would see teacher would ask a question that was like just a yes or no. And if she didn't respond immediately, they thought that she was being basically disrespectful, like she just wasn't speaking. And so we've taught her, and I'm seeing that more counselors are doing this as well in the high school arena, where they're saying, if you need an extra moment, you need to ask for an extra moment. And so I'm hoping that that's one of the things that we'll do with as far as our HR folks interviewing, saying, please take a minute and, if you'll answer this question, take a minute and I'll wait. Okay.
Mhm.
And so people are being more receptive to that. And so um, I think that we're making progress by all means, but it's just the little things that, I hate it when I get a piece of advice and I'm like, how did I not think of that on my own? You
Yeah.
know? And so just taking in these things and that because I'm like, it's not that this hasn't been around forever. It's just where it's really coming to the forefront more than ever. And us just keeping our eyes and being receptive and responsive. And so I haven't received too many in my career that, people have said, "Hey, I need an accommodation." They usually come in and try to wing it. That's what I see.
Mhm.
And then I'm like, "Is there anything that might make this process, more comfortable for you?" Those kind of things. And so one of the interview questions that I've now incorporating is in regards to what is your ideal working environment? Just trying to find out what that is. Some people they'll tell you, and a lot of it is so easy. It just saddens me that we're here that we're not thinking this on our own. But it's to dim the lights. It's like it's really bright in here. It's really bright,
Mhm.
or it is really noisy. Do you mind if I, wear my my little earphones, canceling out noise?
Mhm.
And letting people know that there are specific earphones. My daughter has a pair of these, and people will talk to her. They'll say something, and they'll wait, like they're waiting for her to take the earphones off. And she's like, no, these help me so that I don't hear outside noise and I can focus on what you're saying.
Mm.
And so it's like, oh, well, if you don't know that that exists and you're walking up to someone with earphones on and you go, hey, and you're like signaling for them to remove the earphones. So having people and call in and ask, but I find that especially those new to the workforce, they are very forthcoming with what their needs are. And as far as, and unfortunately for this applicant that had called in to the lady who was calling me, was at a fast food restaurant. And she's like, if you're overwhelmed, she goes, I didn't know what to say other than into your car because we
Mhm.
don't have time. We don't have an overwhelmed place.
Right.
We don't
We
have a
get
tight
slammed and
place.
we get slammed and there's 15 people in line. now that's not the time to take a
That's
break
not the
and,
time.
yeah.
No, right? Exactly.
And I
Mm,
mean, nobody is right for every job, right? And
absolutely.
there are a lot of jobs that I wouldn't be a good fit at for, and so and sometimes that's just a fact of my own behaviors and the way I want to work just aren't going to line up with what they've got to do there, and so there's an amount of that. But you mentioned that overwhelm, and sometimes people, especially maybe different generations, or maybe people who are really introverted, and that's part of how they process information, and they're very hesitant to raise their hand or put their palm up. What are things that you think a leader should watch for in the organization to make sure that employees, and especially those neurodiverse employees, um, are struggling with fit or burnout? What kind of things should we be paying attention to? And again, if we're doing it for the neurodivergent employees, we're probably going to develop those skills to be better about it with our more typical employees too.
And I think the typical employees, if they can get past that, literally, if we can get past that, hey, why are we doing this for them? And just think about for a second, just take a moment for ourselves and say, okay, I really don't like these lights either.
Hmm.
To find that it would be accommodating for all of us. But when it comes to being overwhelmed, I mean, do I need a place to go and sit in a dark room? No. But you know what I do get up from my office, especially if I'm in the middle of something and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I can't make this email sound like I want it to sound," you
Hmm.
know, uh, before AI, of course, right? But it's all up, I'm thinking, what do? I get up, I might go outside and walk around the parking lot.
Hmm.
So if I'm allowed to do that, why would we not allow someone else to go into a dark room and take their moment? I think it's just different. At the end of the day, it's just not what we're accustomed to. Not to say that it's bad or not to say that it's inconvenient, because it's definitely not bad and it sure is not inconvenient. But if we just take the time and think about, ask everybody. I don't want to just
Hmm.
ask my neurodivergent people. I want to ask
Right.
everybody if there was something we could do to make your working environment more productive for you. Give me the list, right? I'll be putting dimmer switches all over this doggone building. That's what I'd be doing. Or providing the earphones. It's such a small. It's if
Or just
even if
letting
it's
the
a
employees
cost.
bring their own headphones and bring, yeah,
Exactly.
we're fine. You can have little cat ears. We don't care
I
as
don't
long as you're not
care. That's
customer facing,
right.
and yeah.
It's back to that when we were started the and I'm
Hmm.
like, I don't care if you're purple polka dotted.
Right.
Like, can you do the job? That's what matters to me, kind of thing. But being inclusive, and it saddens me that we've gone this long, just as organizations as a whole, that we are not able to make the best of our working environments so that our people can be the most productive. At the end of the day, it really is kind of like, it's kind of sad that it took us this long to get here, but I'm hoping that it will be something that will be receptive, that people will, welcome in. And it sounds kind of bad, but when I say stuff like, I want to find my neurodivergent, I want to take total advantage of them. I want to take
Hmm.
total advantage of their brain. I want to bring me everything you have. Knock my socks off, whatever. But just how we perceive it as the typical folks, how we perceive this, and it just amazes me though that some people are like, "Oh my goodness, I never thought of it that way." And while others do things, and I'm like, "What are you thinking?" And if I could give you one more little short story, if we have time,
Yeah.
um, I definitely want to touch on this because I've even debated going to this little restaurant and telling them, maybe to someone a little bigger than the manager, as to what happened. My daughter had started her first job. She was working at a kind of a casual fast food place, and she was working the front counter. And she's always been like the helper. I was like, but she didn't grow out of that point where, in elementary school where everybody wants help, to high school where they're like, okay, I'm telling them, like, not everybody wants your help, even though you want to be helpful. And she doesn't pick up those social cues. She's like, I'm not asking for your advice, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so she was working, and this particular establishment gets a lot of older customers. And she's there and oh, how are you feeling today? How are you? She's, very, I mean, she's who you want at your front desk for sure. And she's asking, oh, what are you interested in they're saying, they're having this little dialogue where these people continue, they were knowing her schedule and they were coming back for her. And so, which did wonderful things for her as an employee, her morale was off the chart. She loved it. And they started leaving her tips. And she was like, I'm sorry, I'm not able to take a tip. And so she kept having the manager come over and saying, we've told you can't take tips. And she's like, I'm not taking a tip. I'm telling them I cannot take a tip. She goes, but she had moved somebody left their money and they said, well, I'm just going to leave it on the counter then. And she moved it over to the side. And then after the next customer, the manager comes over and she got in trouble because she touched the money. So they moved her to the back drive-through window. And to be honest, I really thought that they thought she would just like fail miserably. And they're like, you know what, this isn't working, toodles, that kind of
Right.
thing. And so
Yeah, because companies never change people to jobs that they don't think they're gonna be
yeah,
successful for to get them to quit and leave the organization, right?
exactly, right, that constructive discharge thing.
Yeah.
So, so she was moved to the back drive-through. Well, little do they know that the more multitasking involved, the better she does, to be honest. And so what happened? She's doing great at the drive-through window. So then they start calling her in to go work in the drive-through window, which I was like, that's fabulous, And she wanted all the hours. She was the one to bother you. She'd call and go, okay, I'm finished. Now what? Which I'm finding is one of those traits
Mhm.
as well that goes along with it, that they have to have unique. They do not, most of the neurodivergents that I deal with, they do not do well being bored. So it's another thought, right?
Mhm.
So they kept calling her in for the drive through. Okay. So she didn't have very many hours one week and she was calling in saying, hey, can I come in? Hey, can I come in? So she comes in because they had their dessert that they had some new flavors. So you have to make the dessert. And they said, well, they had 8 new flavors. And so as the lady's like, okay, all of them have the same base. And then we add, and my daughter stops her and says, can I get a pen and paper? Because I'm not going to remember this. I need to write
Mhm.
this down. So that was her training of how to put these 8 desserts together. Um, the next day, she comes in for her shift, and the person called out the drive through. So she went to the drive through window. She continued working the drive through window because they had COVID. 2 weeks later, she's back on her first time she's working cashier since that last, let's try these 8 flavors out. The manager of the region came in. Somebody ordered one of these specialty desserts, and she gets the base together. And then she turns to the person and says, do you know how to make this? Because I'm not. And his response was, because he's like, and his response was, I thought you were trained on this. And what does the neurodivergent person say? Well, I was the one time, but I wasn't allowed to get pen and paper and write it down. And then I've been working the drive-through window for the last month. She finishes out her shift. Now, mind you, the shift that they called her in for 2 hours early to work drive-through until she came to the front cashier. And then they fired her and said, you're just not working out. Why do we feel a need to put people who are good at one thing, like really good at one particular skill set, process, and we think that we have to make sure they're good in these other areas too. Oh my
We just
goodness.
gotta realize everybody brings a different set of skills to the table, and we've got to slot people in those positions where they bring the most value and meet those employees where they are, regardless whether they're neurodiverse, or they're just a regular employee who, checks all the boxes as being, quote, normal. Um, Meet them where they are, do what we can as leaders to find ways to make them successful. And that often means being self-aware ourselves, having the emotional intelligence to realize what's going on with the other person and responding to that in a way that helps them be successful, and taking the onus on ourselves as leaders to be the ones who change first and modify our own behavior first.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. Well, thank you for joining me. We went long today, but I enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me, Christy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Mike.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And share this episode on your favorite social media platform. It really does help people find us. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. Good Morning HR is produced by Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral on Imperative's marketing team. The Good Morning HR theme music was created by Steve Pegler at HR Strategies of Texas. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.